Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's the third day in our series of conversations with our Insight partners. I'm joined today by Mike Hughes and Richard Burrell. If you'd like to say hello, gents.
Good morning, everybody.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here.
Excellent. Ladies and gents, we're going to have a slight issue with Richard's sound because he's in a very posh office with surround sound. So please bear with that, but we'll make sure he speaks up clearly. Gents, just a little bit about your two organizations. Let's start with you, Richard. Tell the audience a little bit about AMP Clean Energy and what your real ethos is around the net zero space.
Yes, I mean, AMP Clean Energy is principally a distributed energy business operating both behind the meter and in front of the meter. Our behind the meter business has historically and continues to be in around the decarbonisation of heat for large corporate customers, and our in front of the meter business is all about flexibility, whether that be in providing flexible generation in the form of gas engines or in energy storage. We are both the developer, operator and owner of assets, and we are owned by an infrastructure fund, Steering Industrial.
Okay, excellent. And Schneider Electric, I mean, what is Schneider Electric? It's many different things, isn't it, Mike?
Yeah, so thanks so much. So again, Mike Hughes from Schneider Electric. I head up Schneider here in the UK and Ireland, and I've been with the company for now over 20 years. And yes, what is Schneider Electric? It's essentially a tech company which is heavily involved in managing the electrical distribution, the way we use electricity and the way we manage electricity, pretty much from picking it up after it comes off the high voltage lines right through to the socket on your wall. So we get involved in everything from commercial buildings, industrial buildings, factories, data centers, and finally right down to the residential. So we are all about how do you manage the use of electricity much more efficiently.
Excellent, excellent. So ladies and gents, hopefully if you've just tuned in this first time, the platform is very simple to use. You can ask questions, just type them in. I've already had one saying, Sumit, you've risen to the shirt challenge. Yes, I thought I'd go for it this morning, so thank you for that. We will be taking questions probably the last 20 minutes, but if you're both happy with it, guys, if we get a question during our discussions that's relevant to our discussion, I might pop it in, so we'll look at that. I'd like to take you through, if you've not seen it, our story, our survey, which I really want to thank you all for filling in, about attitudes towards whether we're facing a net zero reset. So if I just take you through the first major finding we had of our survey, and that is that around about 74% of you don't believe COVID will have a negative impact on your future plans for net zero. Really impressively, and I was quite shocked by this, around about 79% of you think this is a good time to put in your plans for net zero, which we'll discuss in our conversation. And then this probably was the thing that pleased me most. You know, when we set up Future Net Zero back in January when we launched it, our aim was that could businesses lead this challenge? And you agree with us. Now you believe, 79% of you believe it should be business that leads net zero for all of us as a society, not just using government pressure or NGOs and other groups. And I think that's what we really want to push out on. 1/5 of you, which is significant, did believe that COVID would put things back. Of that 1/5, around about half thought not long, have no idea, could be until the lockdown is over. Around about 25% of you believe it will be a delay of a year, and some of you believe it will be longer than that. And finally, who spoke? Now, this again is an interesting graph, but it's probably a function of our database. We had a lot of you from the 0 to 50 employees SME sector, a lot of you in the large corporates, 1,000 plus, but not so many in the mid-market. So my thanks to all of you for participating in that. Gents, can we just start with that first reaction? Two things that really struck me. One is, you know, the 74% who say it's not going to put us back, and then the 79% who say, actually, this is a good time to act. Are you surprised at that? Let's start with you, Mike.
No, I'm not surprised at all. Actually, it's exactly where our thinking is at. I think the plans that we had in place were already clear. I think what the COVID is doing is, in fact, enhancing people's awareness of the situation. And we are also taking the opportunity to accelerate a lot of our plans. So, for example, I mean, one of the difficulties that I have from this, a positive difficulty, is I'm setting some very tough benchmarks for next year, you know. So, you know, I'm already thinking, how am I going to improve my overall sustainability energy efficiency in Q2 2021 versus Q2 2020, when I have such high efficiency right now with not many people traveling, a lot of people at home, energy consumption is down, you know, cars on the road are down, etc. So I'm totally aligned with the survey. And I think for us as Schneider Electric, we're absolutely using it as an opportunity to accelerate our own.
And the financial uncertainty, negativity, fairly certain downturn, that hasn't affected your plans? Isn't going to put an effect on your plans?
No, I mean, not from a sustainability and energy management point of view. I mean, those are actually seen as opportunity levers to accelerate on. So, you know, they're not, you don't necessarily do them because they're going to be more expensive. You're doing them because actually they're potential opportunities to be environmentally correct, but also to save money and bring efficiency to the business. So, you know, we're accelerating that as quickly and probably faster in some cases than before. And as I say, what's very interesting is we're getting a little bit of a preview right now of what that footprint could be like in a future world. So now my challenge is, how do I keep that footprint that I've seen in Q2 and got a little bit of that glimpse of the future?
Yeah. What we'll do is someone said the PC sounds are coming in. We do apologize for that. They said what we'll do is Mike and I will mute when we're not speaking so we can try and make sure that the sound is clearer. Richard, can I get your reaction to the survey and those 2 points in particular?
Yes, absolutely. And I won't repeat. I agree with a lot of what Mike said. I think the points I would make is that the momentum towards net zero was at a sufficient level before COVID. COVID has come along. Yes, it's caused a lot of short-term disruption, but because of the strength of the momentum that existed beforehand, I think the future actually, as we come out of COVID, my personal view is we will come out of it much quicker than everyone thinks that we will, and that momentum will carry through. And I think, as Mike alluded to, one of the things that we've all learned from this process is how quickly we can adapt to a changing world. If you'd said to me a year ago, oh, you've got to come out of all your offices, all work from home for a period of time, it would have probably taken a 6-month detailed project to work out how we're going to do it. We actually all did it in the space of a couple of weeks. So I think the momentum's there. I think we can return very quickly to carrying on that momentum. Yes, there is some disruption in people trying to allocate capital and to get hold of capital to keep that momentum going. But I think there is a huge will and desire of both on the corporates and the financial capital to finance the momentum and get us to these targets. So I absolutely agree with what is in the survey, and I'm surprised it wasn't higher.
I mean, I will caveat, obviously, you wouldn't be a future net zero reader if you didn't believe in it. So we are sort of self-selecting. But in general, with your conversations with your customers out there, gentlemen, are you finding people now seeing, as you know, as we saw, business should lead? You know, this is what this platform is about, business should lead. Are you finding that? Are you finding people going, well, actually, I want to do this proactively rather than I want to wait for a government stimulation. I want to wait for government funding on this, or I'm going to put it on the back burner. Who wants to start on that one?
Yeah, I can comment on that. That's fine. Yes, I fully agree. I think it's a classic case again of business seeing this as being a core value, something that their customers, our customers, certainly as Schneider Electric, are deeply concerned about. As a company, it's something that we are clearly concerned about, and we want to be a leader in the space in saying it's about developing a sustainable future. So of course, government incentive can help, but if you're sitting around waiting for that to happen, you're also neglecting all the great opportunities that you can have anyhow without that. I mean, very simple things like a lot of our technologies go into buildings. They're retrofittable into buildings to help people visualize where they're using energy, how well a building is occupied. This is nothing to do with government incentive. This is just about understanding how you're consuming your energy. Can you make better decisions, etc. So I think I think business, and I think even more important, Sumit, we talked about this before, is the general public is leading on this.
No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, for sure. Richard, you were going to say something.
No, I would agree with that. And I think that the point I would make is that governments stimulate activity in the first instance, but that was 2 or 3 years ago. The corporate sector now has taken on that mantle. And if anything, I would say the governments are going to need to catch up with the speed that the corporates want to actually move this forward. So we've all got the message. We all want to take it forward. And actually, if anything, I would say the government agenda now needs to catch up with the speed and the pace that the corporates are leading on.
One of the other findings, and you can read them, ladies and gents, on the website on Future Net Zero, but we've got an overall story, but there are some bits of data that are deeper that we've pulled out. And one of the ones I want to talk about is this feeling that came out from a lot of people about why it was the right time to act. There's two things, and I've got two bosses here, so I'm going to ask you the question. Our bosses are now more responsive, a bit like you said, Richard. They're doing things they would have said, no, that'll take years to do. They've had to really shift. COVID has kicked their asses, basically, and got them into action. So one, bosses are more receptive. Two, that they feel that actually now to get a project through works because the argument someone would have further down the chain is do invest in this because it will save us money in a time that could be precarious. So they actually think that the impending sort of economic downturn, and I know you're a bit more positive, Richard, but that downturn they think will be a reason for people to say, let's do that. And the third one is about this environmental social benefit. The idea that we've seen people coming together, building the Nightingale hospitals in 4 or 5 days, supporting people, volunteering, helping. And there's an element where some of the people who responded said, we hope this has shown our companies start to think of society. Yeah, we don't think business first, we think society, environment, benefit of business. So if we start with those three things to discuss, you as bosses acting quickly, the whole idea about kind of actually the economics might work for putting projects through, and the social and environmental aspects. So I'll hand over to whoever wants to kick that off.
Well, okay, I'll go first because there's a deathly silence. But what I would say is that as a boss, in terms of running a business, this process that we're currently in, I've never felt more connected with parts of my business than during the COVID crisis, and that's because I think we've all got on with it. We all know where we want to get to, and I think we are organising ourselves in a much more efficient way. And I think the reduction in travel times, the reduction in having face-to-face meetings has actually addressed the balance. I think face-to-face meetings are very important, but I think the fact that you can move projects along, one of the great things about video calls is that people all turn up on time and you can get things done. People can go away from those calls and do the work for the next call. And I think, so the whole pace has changed, but I think in a positive way.
But has it opened your mind? Are you now more an open-minded person than you were before COVID as a boss?
Definitely. I definitely feel that I was actually very against, to be absolutely honest, I was very against working from home and home working. I am now a convert, and I think that actually there is a huge amount of benefit, not only from reducing travel time and all of those sort of things, but just in terms of efficiency and how people can get things done. And I think you need the right mix. And I think what we're doing is looking very carefully at how our new way of working will be, building on the experiences of COVID. It's been an amazing reset, to use the word reset, it's been an amazing reset to the way we operate and get things done. And I think that's been, for me, will be a huge positive to this whole process.
Have you changed, Mike? Are you now a more open boss?
Yeah, I think, you know, as a company, we were always quite used to working in a very flexible way, because it's a large corporate organization. I mean, we're global. We've 150,000 people. And for a large part of my career, I mean, I remember hiring people when I was doing global roles in particular, and they'd say, well, where do you want me to base? And we would say, well, we're not quite sure, you know, because what's the best office for you, you know? So we were always quite good at video meetings, flexible meetings, not really being obsessed about where is this person physically and the rest of it, okay? Now, I think what it has done, Sumit, is it has definitely pushed that model further, exactly as Richard was saying, and saying that model is pushing back on us now as a company and saying, well, yeah, you know, how flexible are you really now? Okay. And I think it's been a hugely positive experience. I have to say, I'm absolutely impressed with the speed that the organization effectively decamped from the offices and started working from home. And I mean, you're talking about organizations, you know, where people like myself, a lot of my sales force, a lot of my senior managers would be very used to that. But we also did it with parts of the organization that had never worked from home. I'm thinking of things like our call center, our technical support centers. And literally within the space of 10 days, everybody's working from home. Huge call out to those people. I mean, very impressive. The things I take from that and from the whole COVID situation, I like Richard's point about the great spirit of just get on with it. I mean, I couldn't put it better than that. There's just that feeling of, oh, for God's sake, get on with it. You know, we have to master this. It's a major challenge. So a great sense of coming togetherness. I think a huge amount of empowerment happening there, because you cannot control everything. You cannot.
What do you mean? Your staff.
Empowerment of people to just believe that they're going to be doing their job. You know, because you know you're not going to call everyone at 9 o'clock in the morning and say, "Are you working now?" You know, whereas in the office you might see them sort of thing. So you just have to let that go, and a lot of trust around that. And again, I've been just super impressed with what's happening. And I think the last one, which I think is very interesting, is I get the feeling that companies themselves have started to feel back, and maybe it's coming from the general public as well, this sense that there has to be a purpose behind companies. That companies have to be more than just the P&L. Yeah. There has to be a contribution back to society, etc. And I think this is linking very heavily. You see all the great actions that were done in supporting, as you said, Nightingale hospitals, or individuals supporting different charities, etc. And I think that's coming back onto companies as well, and saying, well, what are you doing now for the environment? What are you doing to help this? What does your company mean to this new world, etc.? And I think that's a hugely positive thing. And I think that's going to help to accelerate this whole net zero, sustainability, circular economy environment.
Okay.
Can I just add one comment to that? Because I completely agree with you. I also think that the millennial generation, who are the next leaders of the future, they will not join companies and do not want to work for companies that do not embrace this agenda and this agenda for change. And that all helps the momentum. Because I think as we go through time, we need good, young, motivated, high-energy people, and those individuals want to work in organisations and companies that get it. And I think that is a very important piece to the whole employment process as well.
Are you saying we're not young and motivated ourselves?
No, I wasn't being ageist at all.
It wasn't an exclusive statement. It was a general statement. Okay. I was listening to Richard. I was listening to Richard and thinking he's talking to me. So.
Can I just quickly talk about funding? Okay. So again, the point there about funding is important. And thank you for your questions, ladies and gents. We get lots of good questions. We'll come to those in a second. Is funding, let's talk about it. You guys run businesses. Richard, you've got a finance background, and obviously, Mike, you've been running a big corporate for many years. Do you think that there will be funding there for net zero ambition? Do you think that funding will be easy to get? Or is it just the exclusive that the funding will go where the money is? So it'll only be with the big corporates. And for our SME readers and users, they will find it difficult to get that funding to do these projects. What's your view on money post-COVID?
My view on it is that, yes, there is some disruption at the moment in terms of organising funding for COVID because people are looking at their cash and they're looking at their very short-term cash needs. But if you look at funding as a whole, there is a huge move in the asset management industry, in the debt funding industry, to move towards the net zero agenda. So once you get the short-term disruption of COVID out of the way, the money is there. The money wants to allocate to this revolution that's going on. And I think the way I would say to you is I think that companies will be much more open to funding stuff with external help as well as their internal. If they're needing to repair their balance sheet internally because of COVID and the like, that's fine. They can allocate the capital that way. But in terms of external capital coming in to fund these sort of projects, I think there will be a huge boom in that, and it's about channeling that money into the corporate sector, which is what we do at Outlook Clean Energy in terms of putting our financial resources to help corporates achieve what they want to achieve with this agenda.
But that's fine, and I get that there will be money from institutional funding. But what about for the smaller companies? Or do you think it's going to have to be a trickle down? You have to get that money working for the big ones to then affect the supply chain.
No, I think smaller companies, again, you've got to just remove the current disruption and the very difficult recessionary environment that we might be in. But I think everybody gets this, and everyone can play their part. So whether you're big or small, and I'm surprised by the charts that you showed that the mid-tier sector didn't participate hugely in the survey.
As I said, it might just be our database, so I'm not going to.
I'll blame your database. But I think we're seeing a lot in the mid-tier sector.
Yeah.
I don't know whether Mike has the same view, but I don't think you can say it's I don't think you can differentiate between sides of company at the moment. Everyone's got the message.
Yeah, and finding the money, Mike, and you think that will be there for this? Doesn't matter how big or small your company is.
Yeah, I think absolutely aligned with Richard. I think a couple of points. The asset management industry, absolutely. I mean, we see them being very, very proactive now in seeking to finance green initiatives. We certainly, as a company, Schneider Electric in the US, we did an agreement with one of the companies to basically fund the refurbishment of one of the terminals at JFK. And basically, we set up a joint venture together with we were the technology partner, they were the funding partner. That's the type of model that's coming now quite a lot. We see it replicating very quickly where the money is with the asset managers. They're looking for a long-term clear return. They're wanting to understand with technology companies like ours how we can work together. And of course, we don't want to have that on our balance sheet. We're about the technology, but they're all about managing the balance sheet and the funding. I think that is going to boom. I totally agree on that. I think the second one to remember is the government is pumping a lot of money into the economy now. And what you're starting to see is that money is coming with, let's call it green sustainable credentials behind it. Meaning, if you're going to take this money, then you have to be proving that you're reducing your overall footprint, improving your environmental footprint, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's excellent. I think that's a great way of moving this whole debate forward. And the last point I would make is being a tech company, the way that we would look at this is your classic small and medium-sized company is pretty aware of this topic, and what they're looking for are easy solutions that they can put in their factories and their buildings.
Absolutely.
That immediately allow them to make those savings, so that they're not complicated, they're easy to put together, they get clear data feedback, and it says I'm saving money. And those are the type of solutions that we're constantly trying to work on, whether it's in buildings or factories or data centers or in the home, etc. So yes, I think overall, I don't think that the issue will be the funding. I think funding will continue to get better and better and better as we move forward.
Okay. I'm amazed at how many questions are coming in. It's brilliant. I think you've got loads of fans out there, both of you. So, or it's your staff. I don't know, one of the others anyway. But we'll get to those in a moment. I want to do one last thing before we take questions. I'm going to give more time for questions. Heat, right? Now, heat is one of those things that I think we really ought to look at. And I know you're both interested in it, particularly you, Richard, but without doubt. But, heat is going to be a major challenge for us if we are going to get to net zero. And the decarbonisation of heat, with what I think the latest figures are around about nearly 40% of total carbon emissions is heat. When we always think about net zero or efficiency, everyone thinks electricity. Everyone thinks about kind of, demand side, all of that stuff. Why do you feel that heat hasn't been seen enough? Secondly, do we need a real government statutory push on heat? And thirdly, what are you guys doing about heat? So let's start with the first one. Let's start with you, actually, on this, Mike. Is heat looked at enough?
It's starting to be. It's starting to be. I think that's correct. This debate had started more about electricity for whatever reason. Fine. I mean, and obviously we've had the whole onshore wind story, the massive success of the offshore wind story, the amazing success of solar that we're seeing, the numbers that have been coming in through the months of April, May, etc. I mean, absolutely fantastic. So yes, heat has probably been lagging that debate. Now, of course, I think where heat comes in is once you start to look at the energy consumption, you actually realize, well, one of the biggest parts of it is heat. And historically, that has, of course, been done with gas, which has been relatively in abundance in the past and at a reasonable price. But of course, as you look at it from a net zero point of view, it's a part of the mix that you have to start to address. And the electrification of heat, I think it's gaining momentum. I think you start to see a number of incentives coming in there. You start to see a lot of initiatives from the government, particularly, this discussion around no new builds with boilers from 2025, etc. There's an expectation that when the Chancellor does his budget in July, I think it is, that there'll be something around, an incentive around phasing out of boilers, etc. So this is coming, and it's coming quickly. Now, I think it's going to create a massive challenge in terms of the volume of energy that is required to make that transition. And I personally, I've been sort of just involved in that recently because I put in an air source heat pump recently, and it's very interesting when you get into it, looking at the economics of it, the cost of gas per kilowatt hour versus the cost of electricity per kilowatt hour, and it's all down to the efficiency of the pump. So it's quite a complex area for the average consumer, but you can see government coming in with more and more incentives to tip that balance. So I think it's right in the center of the agenda, and I think we're going to hear more and more about that as the months and the quarters go by.
Richard, does government need to push like they did with feed-in tariffs? Do they need to push heat right up the agenda for businesses and domestic consumers?
Absolutely. You asked the question why heat had lagged behind power and all of that. Heat decarbonisation is by far the most difficult piece to crack. And absolutely, as Mike says, the electrification of heat and using technologies, whether it be air source heat pumps, whether it be infrared heating, whether it be waste heat recovery, all of those types of initiatives need to play a part in this mix, because unless we can make some real inroads to that process, you will not get to net zero. So, our focus as a company is how can we help on the power side with the flexible generation with all of the explosive growth in solar and wind to support that, because you're going to need much more of that to support the electrification of heat. And then what can we do on the heat side? We started obviously with biomass because it gives high temperature heat, but that is now morphing into heat pumps. It's also morphing into the whole infrared space. And I think heating as a goal and as a focus should absolutely be centre stage in any government initiatives. And I think they have that message. I don't think they've yet got all the answers, but I think the message is getting through, and we are definitely well on the way to getting ourselves free of what we were as a coal-based economy where everyone had a chimney in their house and that was how they heated their house. Going forward, we're going to have a much more electrically orientated decarbonisation of heat.
Okay. I think we should take some questions now, guys. So we've got loads. Keep them coming in, ladies and gents. Just ask your questions. So here's an interesting one. So this question says, I'm new in my role as a sustainability manager. I'm taking on projects looking into contracts and funding from investors. What tips do you have for someone young, excellent, taking on this challenge? So slightly older people, what tips have you got for someone young trying to get into this role as a sustainability manager? And actually that hard thing when you're young, you've got an idea, how do you get that message over to get the funding? What would you say? Mike?
I would say the most important thing to remember if you're in a commercial organization, and I'm assuming that you are, is the project has to stand up financially. Otherwise, as it gets scrutinized, the companies are let's say financially driven to a certain extent. Okay. But if you're trying to put forward something that you can present it in a way where there's a clear return on investment for the company, you're going to accelerate the opportunity being picked up. Okay, so it's not just about the sustainability piece. What sustainability awareness is doing is making companies more willing to listen and to invest in those topics, and maybe even invest in some projects that don't have such a clear return, but they're the right thing to do. But the more that you can make it financially clear, the better success that you have. Okay. Now, I'm just thinking of an example that I have on my table right now. I got a lot of cars out on the road, vans and cars, etc. And we know that, for example, our carbon footprint right now, about 50%, especially now, is around our fleet. 50% of my carbon footprint in the UK and Ireland is actually the fleet. So we have a plan to transition that fleet entirely to electric vehicles over the next 3.5 years. Okay. Now, is that going to be justifiable financially? Maybe yes, maybe no, but it's the right thing to do. Okay, it's not going to cost me money. Maybe I won't make a huge saving, but there's a great project, hugely impactful. You can put up a financial argument. You can also put up a sustainable argument, and that's a massive impact, because it means I've got about 1,000 people out there driving around that in 3 years' time are going to be all electric.
Richard?
I would say to a young person, I don't know what organisation you're working in, but I would have a look around at your competitor companies to see how they are looking to decarbonise. And I would talk to organisations like Schneider Electric, like Amp Clean Energy, who are doing it already with a whole variety of different companies. And we can take you round facilities that we've got, and you could spend a day with us, and we would be able to show you a range of different projects that other companies are doing. And I think you would then get an insight as to what fits your particular company and how it might work. The only thing I would warn you on is beware of the very new technologies that are untried and untested. If you're coming in young, look for some of the quick wins with some of the tried and tested technologies, and then look to expand your thinking, having got some momentum internally with some projects that work and, as Mike says, make a P&L benefit, because that's obviously what will help drive it.
Excellent. A question.
I just come back on that one because I think Richard makes a great point about checking the environment. Understand what good looks like. What is best in class. So whatever specific area you're looking at, whether it's efficiency of energy in a building for kilowatt hour per meter squared, whatever it is, get into your community, understand what good looks like, and then, as Richard says, go out and talk to people.
This question is, I can't validate this question, but I'm going to take it as read that Power Business Solutions call for a progressive tax on fossil fuel producers and a percentage of renewable electricity by law with subsidies. Does the panel agree with this view? So, with respect to a progressive tax on fossil fuel and a percentage of renewable governed by law. What's your view?
Well, I have a personal view that I think that there could certainly be some taxation or fiscal intervention to companies that are not embracing the net zero agenda. So if people are putting in fossil fuel heating systems and haven't considered some of the other types of system, then absolutely, taxation can play its part. I think you've got to be careful and balance the stick and carrot process with it. But I certainly think I wouldn't see it as a way of funding net zero. I'd see it really as a way of pushing the agenda to the rest of the work that needs to be done. But yeah, I don't see it as the only solution.
Mike, taxation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would tend, I think it's much more important to focus on the positive incentives. I think the general public and companies like ours are certainly, we get it. You don't have to convince us. We're trying to do it, So the more positive incentive there is for us to move to a particular technology, whether that's, and again, offshore wind is a great example. We said government stimulated that market. Then withdrew from the market, and then the private sector kept driving the market, and now energy coming from offshore wind is cheaper than a lot of fossil fuel generated energy, certainly on certain days of the year, etc. So I think there's a lot that can be done around positive incentives. I'm thinking around building standards, insulation standards, the whole boilers topic, the tariffs around renewable energy, the tax incentives around the way you amortize incentives for investments that you do on renewable energy, rather than looking at it from a negative point of view and say, I'm going to tax this. I prefer to see it more on the positive side.
I've been... Sorry, Richard, I want to get on to the questions because we've got loads of them, if you don't mind. I've been in sustainability for 16 years, this person says. The SMEs will not lead the change. They're out to survive. Probably fair point. The corporates, absolutely. However, in one of your previous webinars, it's the CFO that signs it off, and that's true. Will the CFOs now, who work for you guys, be able to say, yeah, we'll do that. We'll help these things happen? What's your view, boys?
Well, we at AMP Clean Energy have access to our own infrastructure fund, and that's exactly what we're doing. So when the CFO of a corporate customer of ours doesn't want to spend their CapEx budget on a clean energy initiative, that's exactly where our infrastructure fund and indeed the asset management industry is heading, where we will actually fund those projects on our balance sheet and either sell heat or power as a service to that corporate. So it doesn't have to be the company itself that has to find the money. We can find the money and then just enter into a heat or power agreement with that company, and that is, I think, the way forward, because that will help people who have got strained balance sheets.
And Mike, that idea.
I fully agree. I think the CFO is the key person actually, because from my personal experience. The CFO is the one that probably has the best understanding of all the incentives and tax incentives and write-offs and whatnot that you can get into that spreadsheet that allows you to look at that opportunity and to decide whether it's doable or not, to get it over the line. So I would say yes. The answer is absolutely yes. Another interesting practice that we do at a corporate level is, we run a sustainability barometer that we publish every quarter. And we publish that when we announce our results globally every quarter. It's the CFO that presents the sustainability barometer, not the CEO. So the CFO is the face of our sustainability story to the markets, to the public markets, etc., as a statement of saying, this is a core value of the company, and it's not just something driven beyond the financial community, it's driven by the financial community.
COVID has had, and I'm going to caveat this, obviously it's a devastating effect on our lives and the families of people who've died, but the positive effect on energy efficiency, this person says, can that be sustained as the UK ramps up productivity to avoid recession? And how can we retain some of the key benefits we've achieved, but obviously in the background of a very low economic activity? Let's start with you, Richard. How do we keep the good things, but obviously, avoid the issue of how we get our way out of the recession?
Well, it comes back to the point about momentum. There was huge momentum for net zero pre-COVID. There is a whole industry in lots of different strands that is developing to meet this agenda. And actually, if you focus on those industries and the industries that are making this agenda happen, that will lead us out of recession, because it will create jobs, it will create sustainable processes, whether it's in transport, whether it's in heat, whether it's in power, and that will become one of the mainstays of the economy. And I think that is what I'm basically saying about this whole momentum piece. The momentum will drive us out of the current crisis that we've been through, and the growth coming out of recession will be sustainability led rather than some of the more traditional ways that we've come out of recession hitherto.
Mike, your view on keeping the benefits?
Yeah, I think it will happen. I think I don't think anybody thinks we're going to go back to exactly as we were before the lockdowns, particularly. I think we talked a little bit earlier about working from home, how some people are getting very used to that. That's something that we want to obviously build into the whole way that we operate, reducing commuting times, being more efficient, being more flexible around, let's say, home life and working life, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think it's going to set us some very challenging benchmarks, as I talked about earlier. I mean, I'm already thinking about Q2 2021 and thinking, I don't want to be publishing a report that says my carbon footprint went up in Q2 2021. Now, I'm up against a damn tough benchmark where the whole organization is working from home. I have probably less than 10% of my fleet on the road. So, it's setting us some nice, interesting challenges around how do we maintain the footprint that we see now as best as possible as we go forward.
Picking up on that point, this person says it's a significant number of employees working at home, obviously, right? Although energy, office use and traffic flows will drop, this will lead to higher domestic heating and power demand. And let's be honest, most homes are less efficient than offices. So is this really the right move? It's an interesting point, isn't it? If we do say 1/3 of workforce is now working from home, I know my home is nowhere near as efficient as it should be. And I'm sure that's a lot for a lot. So there's swings and balances compared to your offices, and I know particularly I've been to your ones, Mike, where there's a lot of energy efficiency already put in there. So how do we deal with that? That's quite an interesting conundrum, isn't it? On the positive, they're not commuting, they're not getting out there, but the negative, are their homes and the power demand they're sucking up there counteracting that? Start with you, Mike.
Yeah, great topic. I mean, my first reaction to that would be assuming that we're not heating our homes during the day when we're in the offices, and is maybe actually we'll get a net saving overall from that, as people who are at home are actually using a lot of that energy that they're already consuming while they're away. I don't have the answers on that. I think it's an excellent topic, and I think it really goes back to the whole point of saying, are we clear on the energy we're using in our homes? And I'll be the first person to pull my hand up on that and saying I probably personally haven't spent enough time on that either. Okay, I can tell you exactly how many kilowatt hours I consume in my office in London, but I cannot tell you what I use in my home. Okay,
You're not the only one.
yeah, sure. So I mean, I'm trying to put my hand up here and lead a very open discussion. Okay. Now, as I said, I put a heat pump in, and suddenly, I'm forensically looking at every kilowatt hour, and I think that changes your whole perception around saying, well, how much energy am I using in my home? How much am I paying for that? What is the price of electricity per kilowatt hour versus gas? What are the tariffs at different times of the day? So I think what it will do, Summit, on a positive side, I think it will start to make people more aware of that energy consumption at home, start to look at how they can improve things. And I hope that, of course, the whole home automation story and technology story, like Schneider is bringing to the market, as well as many others, are helping people to be able to get a visualization of their energy in a much easier and faster way. But I'm not convinced that it's going to increase energy. I think it might actually save it, because I think a lot of us are already heating our homes even when we're not there.
Probably. Richard, briefly on that one?
Yeah, I would agree. Actually, I think the momentum for domestic sorting out people's homes and all of that, if you can crack that, you will be very much along the journey of particularly of heat decarbonisation, because power comes in, it's being done at a generation level. It can be done domestically, but the key is the heat in the homes. And I think people will start to look at whether it's an air source heat pump, whether I say it's an infrared heating system and things like that. And I think building up that momentum will move the domestic thing along a lot faster.
I don't know what's going to our audience. Great question. My God, they're flying in. Do you think then, this is a really interesting one. Do you think there needs to be a certain standard to define the scope and boundaries of net zero? That's quite interesting, because we have a government definition of what it is, but there is a lot of confusion of what to include and exclude when setting a net zero target. So you can talk about offsetting here, you can talk about what is your reaction to that, Jens? Let's start with you, Richard. Should there be an actual certain standard like the ISOs we have that says this is what net zero means for businesses, small, medium, large?
I'm going to slightly dodge the answer to that and say, yes, I think we should have it, but I don't think now is the right time to put it in place. I think we've got to keep the initiative going, and probably, if we're looking at the net zero target in 5 years' time, start to think about that and starting to pick up what I call the non-believers at that point. But I think start putting in hard systems and processes now might kill the very positive momentum that we've got. So I would leave things be for a period of time and then bring it in probably 3 to 5 years' time rather than immediately.
Briefly on that, what are you interpreting net zero to be for your organisation then? Are you saying it's a mix of the offsetting, it's a mix of you reducing your own carbon footprint and the product you sell? How are you defining it, as this person is asking?
Well, as a corporate entity, what we can do, very, very quickly is obviously looking at travel. You can look at vehicles. We have relatively small offices. You can do all of those sort of things. But actually, what we're about is actually providing capital, providing development resources, and providing technology to help other people get to where they want to get to. So we can do our bit, which is what we do. But actually, it's about channeling capital and development resources to help other people get where they need to get to.
Mike, a standard? What's net zero to you, Mike?
Yeah, I think Richard is right. I think it's going to evolve. I don't think we should be over obsessed with how exactly do we measure it to the nth degree at this stage. I think there's already some very good things happening on that. I think the first point that's important, and I think again compliments to the UK government for doing that, is putting the flag in the ground and saying net zero by 2050. Okay, now you can have a nice intellectual philosophical argument about what that exactly means, or you can start working towards it and let the standards evolve. And I think we're more in the second one at the moment. Okay? And I think that's good, because what's important is more about the action rather than the pure definition at this point. I think the definition will come for sure, because countries will want to sort of check with each other. Are we measuring in the same way, etc.? I think what's also going to come is a lot more standards and awareness of measurements around what is the carbon footprint of my car, my home, my office, all of the consumer things that we use. I think you're going to start seeing some kind of sustainability level index coming on that. And let's not forget that, companies like Schneider, we've already committed to being carbon neutral by 2025. And we use the famous science-based target, which again are trying to be very clear in external measurement. What does it mean? How have you calculated, etc.? I think this will come naturally with time.
Okay. We've got about 9 minutes left. I want to crack on with the questions. Again, this is an interesting one. I agree with decarbonising heat using renewable sources, says this person. But what are your views on decarbonising industrial steam, which cannot be replaced with heat pumps? What's your opinion on incentives for electric steam boilers? Now, I'm not very knowledgeable of how big the industrial steam sector is, but I'm going to hand over to you guys. I'll start with you, Richard.
So, I mean, in terms of decarbonising the production of steam, the sort of technologies that you've got for that, biomass is a technology that can produce steam and can decarbonise away if it's being done at the moment with a fossil fuel. If what part of the question maybe is how can you recover heat that is coming off systems and then steam going up chimneys. The whole business around waste heat recovery and putting that back into the electrical system, I think has got a long way to go, particularly in glass, in manufacture of steel and the like. So I'm unsure whether the question is relating to generation of steam or use of steam.
I assume it's generation. I'm not sure. Mike, briefly on that.
Yeah, I'm going to take the fifth on that one. I'm not an expert on steam, but I would agree with Richard. It's probably a combination of looking at. I mean, these are great opportunities to look at things again and saying, what do we use the steam for? How do we generate the steam? And I think the key to it is in the generation. Is it moving to a biofuel, etc.? I absolutely no opinion on electrification of steam generation. I haven't even looked at that topic. I'll take it with me because I like to look into these things privately and try to understand them. But the waste heat recovery is definitely an area. But I used to do some work in the cement industry. Again, they were very heavily involved in how do we recapture the heat and use it again. But I don't have anything professional to add to the steam topic.
This came up a bit yesterday. Do you see heat carbonisation as electrification or a big role for hydrogen? Now, I'm personally a fan of hydrogen, and the network is there, and I know it needs a bit of tinkering, and loads of people have always corrected me on the physics of how hydrogen explodes. But that's an interesting one. Go with hydrogen, use the network as is, or use electrification to decarbonise heat. Richard, let's start with you on that one.
I'm also a believer in hydrogen. The only thing I would say is how much can you, how deep can hydrogen play a role in the current system? I think you can put about 40%, I think, into the gas network. So I think you've got to have both, and I think there are, because obviously you've got to be on or off the gas grid. There is a lot of properties that are off the gas grid. So therefore, you've got to look at electrification of heat, particularly for the off-gas grid properties. And on the on-gas grid, I think it's just the speed of how quickly you can get hydrogen into the system. So my solution there is to do both.
Hydrogen being.
Yeah, I can see that happening. I think the grid is there, the network is there, the gas is there. There's a lot of renewable energy as well for potentially making green hydrogen or blue hydrogen, whatever you want to call it. So I think it will be a combination. And when you talk to people from the Climate Change Committee, it's quite clear they're saying, look, we need everything we've got. to get to the net zero story. So I can see particularly in the UK, there's a lot of specific situations in the UK, a lot of offshore renewable energy, a gas network that's already existing. So I could see hydrogen being in the gas network. I can see hydrogen fuel cells also having a future role, whether that's in cars or even in the domestic off-grid type of situations. And of course, there will be a role for electrical as well. I mean, as Schneider Electric, we see that very clearly. The electrification of heat will be a big part of that story. But I don't think it will be 100%. I think hydrogen will definitely play a role.
Okay, well, this will probably be the last question. I'm sorry, ladies and gents, we just run out of time. And if we can keep it brief on this one, gents, your answer to this question, and I think it's quite an interesting one that we've looked at here at Future Net Zero. Would a carbon tax help to accelerate decarbonisation? Mike?
Yes, I think it would. The challenge of the carbon tax is obviously getting it to work, but I think if we were paying more for things that had a higher carbon footprint, I think again it's more on the negative side of incentive than the positive one. But I think it has clearly historically been shown to work. I think the complexity of it and how you measure it has always been the challenge. But I would have to say, if it can be done right, yes.
Richard?
Yes, I believe that. I definitely believe in it, but I think it needs to be targeted at certain areas. So I think where it's possible to measure it and possible to implement it, then I'm a great believer in it. What I would say is I also think there is a greater role for the government to play in issuing a green gilt and then using the proceeds of a green gilt to lend out and move the decarbonisation agenda. So I think there's a tax and borrowing side of things from the government that can both play in that mix.
Excellent. All right. I think we're probably there. So ladies and gents, please do rate this webinar and let us know what you think. And just to end with, your summing up thoughts, gents. I mean, I feel fairly positive after our survey. I feel positive that companies like you have joined us as well on this platform. And, we're getting more and more feedback that people think this is the right thing to do. Are you both optimistic? And I know there'll be an economic shock coming, but I think we all accept that. But are you optimistic that the net zero pathway, where we know that we have to do a lot by the end of this decade to get to where we want to get by 2050, are you optimistic where we are right now? Mike?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the future has not been cancelled. So, we were traveling a journey before this economic shock and this pandemic came along. We will be traveling a journey after this pandemic has gone. We return to more, let's say, normal economic time. So this is definitely a major bump in the road. There's no question about that. But the journey is clear. And as I said, the future has not been cancelled at all. And companies like ours are working our way through that, as we have done many, many, many times before. I mean, for me personally, my career, I think this is my fourth good recession economic slap. So it's not like it's something new. It's big. There's no question about that. But no, I'm extremely optimistic about the future.
Richard, you've seen a few.
Without repeating all the good points that Mike has made, the momentum's there, the capital's there, the desire is there. We are in a bump in the road, but I think we're beyond this being diverted, this journey being diverted from something as bad as this pandemic. I think we'll get over this pandemic, and actually we will take a lot of positives from it. And I think I'll make a controversial remark. I think actually the pandemic has made the journey to net zero easier, because it's really taught us to look closely at what we need, how we run our lives.
No, absolutely. Both of you, thank you so much for joining us. I think I won the shirt competition, but you both did not too bad, actually.
Hands down, yeah.
Ladies and gents, it ends with me to say thank you so much to both Richard and to Mike for joining us. Look after yourselves, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care.